Hello and welcome. In this video I thought we would take a look at the different brotherhoods of the Grey Knight faction. The different brotherhoods serve as the sub-faction for the Grey Knights, similar to chapters for the Space Marines or great cults for the Thousand Sons. And while all armies have their sub-factions, I will say the Grey Knights probably have the most variety in terms of their brotherhoods seeing play. In addition to that, the Grey Knight Brotherhoods are one of the more interesting sub-factions as they have the most universally viable rules, due to the fact that instead of having a trait, a relic, and a stratagem like most armies do, they have a stratagem, a psychic power, and a warlord trait. And in addition to that, all of the Brotherhood Psychers that are part of the Brotherhood know the Brotherhood Psychic power in addition to all of the other psychic powers that they may know. This means that you have access to both a stratagem and a psychic power on the majority of your squads in most situations. This means that their brotherhoods give them incredible flexibility, as when you're restricted to a relic instead of a psychic power, it only usually benefits one specific model or one specific unit as it does in many other factions. In this situation, their abilities are much more universal and much more interesting, and this probably leads to that variety of play that we see within the different brotherhoods. That being said, there are definitely brotherhoods that are winners and losers within the distribution of what we see within different tournaments. That doesn't mean you can't experiment with different options, it just means that there's definitely a visible distribution in terms of how things are played. In any case, with that being said, let's take a look at the different brotherhoods ordered from most played to least played, with the first three brotherhoods being the majority of different Grey Knight armies that we see within different tournaments. The first brotherhood is definitely the most popular one, seeing the most results within different tournaments. This brotherhood being the Prescient Brethren. The stratagem of the Prescient Brethren is known as Foresight, and for one command point, this stratagem allows you to select a Psyker unit within the shooting or fight phase, and each time a model knight unit makes an attack, you can reroll a hit roll of 1 and a wound roll of 1. That definitely does help with the consistency of the output of your models, and it's something that can come in handy rather often in many situations. As for the psychic power is known as Fatal Recognition, and this is a malediction psychic power with a warp charge value of 5. And what it does is it allows you to select an enemy unit within 12 inches of the psyker casting the psychic power, and each time that unit would make a move, whether that's a normal move, an advanced move, a charge, or they fall back, you roll a d6. On a 4 to 5, they suffer d3 mortal wounds, and on a non-modified 6, they suffer 3 mortal wounds instead. This can definitely be a very powerful ability, as it gives you a 50-50 chance of dealing an average of 2 mortal wounds on them whenever they make a move. In addition to that, there is one restriction on the psychic power, in that it says any enemy unit can only be affected by the psychic power a maximum 1 time per phase. And that would normally be rather strange wording for a psychic power, but do not forget that the Grey Knights have the ability to cast their Brotherhood psychic power multiple times within a single turn. This means in certain situations, you can activate the ability to cast a Brotherhood psychic power multiple times within 1 turn and distribute this ability across multiple enemy units, and as a result of that, you can actually generate quite a good amount of mortal wounds throughout various turns thanks to its Brotherhood psychic power ability. And that definitely makes it a lot stronger than it would initially appear on first glance. And finally, the warlord trait for the Prescient Brethren is known as Divination. Divination says the bearer can attempt to perform the following psychic action, and if the psychic action is successful with a warp charge value of 6, then you gain 1 command point upon resolution of the psychic action. This isn't the most impressive warlord trait in the world, but it can definitely help you generate quite a good few command points throughout the game if you're willing to use the investment of using it within every single turn, and considering that command points are at a bit of a premium within the game currently, it can definitely add up over time. And what I'll say about this brotherhood is that if you look at it, the thing that makes it so powerful is that the stratagem, the psychic power, and the warlord trait are all very playable and can have real and significant impact on the game, thus making this brotherhood very effective at being a very top contender for top brotherhood. That being said, let's move on to the next brotherhood, which is the Swordbearers Brotherhood, and in terms of tournament representation, it's about as popular as the Rapier's Brotherhood, which is the third most popular brotherhood for the Grey Knight forces. This is definitely a very vehicle-based brotherhood, and don't forget that Dread Knights, despite their appearance, are still a vehicle unit. So what does the Swordbearers Brotherhood do? Well, the stratagem that it has access to is known as Marked for Death, and it costs a total of 2 command points, which could be rather expensive, but considering what it does, it's definitely a rather powerful stratagem. And what the stratagem does is in your shooting phase, you can select an enemy unit that is visible and within 12 inches of the psyker using the stratagem, and when a Swordbearer's model makes range attacks against the selected unit, they gain +1 to their hit roll. Now this doesn't seem as impressive at first, but consider that this affects every single unit shooting at the enemy unit and not just a single unit. Many times getting +1 to your hit roll on a single unit will cost you 1 command point. So if you're getting this ability on at least 2 different units, you're already breaking even, and if you get additional units to fire at the single target, which is probably going to be a priority target that you definitely need to get off the board really quickly, it's definitely going to be an ability that makes up its value rather quickly, and as such, it's a rather powerful stratagem that in the right circumstances can be very influential. As for the psychic power for the Swordbearer's Brotherhood, the psychic power is Empiric Lodestone. Empiric Lodestone is a malediction psychic power with a warp charge value of 7. This psychic power allows you to select an enemy unit within 18 inches, and Swordbearer vehicles gain +1 to wound with range attacks against that selected enemy. This can once again really help you wound against some high toughness targets, and can really make those Nemesis Dread Knights exceptionally effective if you're taking a maximum of 3 of them, and additionally taking a Grandmaster and a Nemesis Dread Knight. This definitely can add up very quickly and is a rather powerful ability in the right situations. As for the Warlord trait is known as Rights of Protection, and Rights of Protection says that the bearer gains a new psychic power. This psychic power has a warp charge value of 5, and this character then performs a psychic action, and once completed, the Swordbearer vehicle within 12 inches of the bearer of the psychic power gains a 4+ invulnerable save. Now do keep in mind that Dread Knights in this situation do have a 4+ invulnerable save as it is, so this isn't necessarily useful with them. However, if you're running other vehicles within your list, say something like a Rhino or Razorback, this can definitely come into play and be useful in protecting that transport unit. In addition to that, it works on other vehicles as well, so there are going to be situations where this does come into play and can be rather useful. Once again, all 3 abilities of the Swordbearers are relatively useful, and I'll say this much, the psychic power and the stratagem are very powerful in the right situations. The Warlord trait isn't as amazing in itself, but it definitely has its place in certain situations. In any case, you can definitely see a theme that the more powerful Brotherhoods definitely have more universal abilities that give them benefits from all 3 of their different benefits instead of being very skewed towards one benefit or another. The third Brotherhood that's equally as popular as the second and can easily overtake the Swordbearer's Brotherhood is the Brotherhood of the Rapier, which is a type of sword, so it's very similar in naming convention to the previous Brotherhood. This Brotherhood stratagem is known as Deadly Efficacy. This stratagem costs a total of 1 command point, and it says in the fight phase, you select a friendly Brotherhood unit, and melee attacks for that unit score an additional hit when they roll an unmodified 6 to hit on a melee attack, and this can definitely add up really quickly to generate a lot of bonus melee attacks, considering that the Grey Knights can definitely be a very melee-focused army in a lot of their different builds, and as such, this can really make one of your melee armies all the more efficient. As for their psychic power is known as Symphonic Strike. Symphonic Strike is a blessing psychic power with a warp charge value of 6 that says that models in the Psyker's unit gain +1 to their attack characteristic. Once again, a melee focused ability and one that can be very powerful, especially when combined with that stratagem previously mentioned, considering that each additional attack has a chance of scoring an additional hit when rolling to hit. As such, these 2 abilities complement each other very well, and as you can see, this once again keeps with the trend mentioned previously about what makes a very good subfaction. Now finally, the Warlord trait for this Brotherhood is the Inescapable Wrath. The Inescapable Wrath says that the bearer can charge even if they've advanced within this turn. Once again, a decent enough Warlord trait as it allows it to move across the board even more quickly and get within a close range before attempting a charge against an enemy unit. And anything that helps a melee-focused character get within melee combat is definitely a good thing to consider, because any melee unit that fails its charge roll has failed to make any of its attacks, and it's probably going to be shot off the table before it can be really impactful on the game itself. And once again, all 3 of the abilities are rather good for this Brotherhood. And before we continue on to our next Brotherhood, if you're looking for models in the United States and want to receive a 15% discount, or if you're a collector of Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, or any other card games, do check out the web store link in the description down below, or visit venturetradeco.com, where you can get 15% off of all of the different Games Workshop model kits with new products added all the time to the selection of different items offered. And if you buy anything from the web store, you do help support the channel, and for that, I thank you very much. Anyway, with that being said, let's return to our regularly scheduled content. The next 3 Brotherhoods are rather niche in nature and see very minimal play, but they did see some play in the different turn lists that I did look over. So do keep that in mind that these aren't necessarily very common, but they do see occasional use, so that's definitely more than I can say about a lot of different sub-factions within the game. The first of these 3 Brotherhoods is the Preservers. The Preservers have a very interesting stratagem that is a one-time use stratagem unless you're playing above 2,000 points, at which point you can use it up to 2 times. This stratagem will cost you a total of 1 command point and can only be used when mustering your army, where you have to select a Dreadnought unit within your list. If you use this stratagem in that situation, the Dreadnought model gains the following. It has an 8-inch move, and it can roll the roll when making a charge roll. In addition to that, whenever that model makes a successful charge, it gains +1 to the damage characteristic of its melee weapons within melee combat. This is definitely an interesting ability and can definitely make Dreadnought a very serious force to be reckoned with. I do wish that the Grey Knights had more Dreadnought units, as this is definitely an interesting ability, but the selection choices you have are not particularly vast, and do remember that the Dread Knight is not a Dreadnought, so there's a difference between a Knot and a Knight. If this could have affected a Dread Knight unit, you probably would have seen this Brotherhood see a little bit more use. However, until the Grey Knights get some more selection in their Dreadnoughts, or this becomes usable with a Dread Knight, this Brotherhood is probably going to be a little bit on the weaker side than it could be. Anyway, moving on, let's take a look at the Psychic Power. The Psychic Power for this Brotherhood is known as Aegis Eternal. Aegis Eternal is actually an interesting Psychic Power in that it's a Blessing Psychic Power that has a warp charge value of 6. When successfully manifested, the Psyker's unit gains a 6+ Feel No Pain against all wounds that it will suffer. This can definitely add up really quickly, and if you cast this on multiple units, you can definitely make it very hard for your opponent to really successfully damage your units that are very durable as it is. And in addition to that, if this is used on an infantry unit that is within 3 inches of an apothecary model, that unit gains a 5+ Feel No Pain instead. Definitely a nice perk to have, and it can really add up rather quickly. In terms of the Warlord relic that this Brotherhood has access to, that Warlord trait is known as Radiant Exemplar. And Radiant Exemplar says that you add 3 inches to the Warlord's aura abilities to a maximum of 12 inches. This isn't the worst trait to have, but at the same time, it's not the most impressive either. Generally, Warlord traits like this are a little bit on the weaker side, and unfortunately seeing that the stratagem of this Brotherhood is very specific and very niche in nature, it definitely shows why this Brotherhood isn't as popular as the top 3. But hey, it can definitely be an interesting Brotherhood to play around with, as the Psychic Power can be rather strong, and even the stratagem can be rather interesting if you want to play a Dread Knight within your Grey Knights list. Moving on to a 4th Brotherhood, we come to the Extractors, which is once again a rather niche Brotherhood. The Extractors have a stratagem known as Sancta Guard, which costs 1 command point, and you can use this stratagem in your opponent's charge phase. And what this allows you to do, it allows one of your units that is not in engagement range already to heroically intervene into the enemy unit that is making that charge move. This can definitely be very useful, and this can allow you to collapse onto an enemy unit that is charging one of yours, thus allowing you to get the upper hand within melee combat. It is a little bit situational, as you do need to have a unit that can heroically intervene and isn't already in engagement range of an enemy unit. In either case, when this is useful, it can be very useful, but in a lot of situations, you might have a little bit of a hard time setting some of these situations up. In any case, it's definitely a nice enough stratagem, and one that you'll find different uses for if you choose to go into this Brotherhood. As for the Psychic Power, the Psychic Power is known as Fires of the Covenant. Fires of the Covenant is a Witchfire Psychic Power with a warp charge value of 5, and allows you to select an enemy unit that is within engagement range of the Psyker's unit, and then you roll a d6 for each model in that enemy unit, and for each 4+ rolled, that enemy unit suffers 1 mortal wound. This can definitely be very powerful, and once again, it can add up rather quickly if you're able to cast this Psychic Power multiple times and have multiple units engaged with enemy units. This once again is a little bit of a niche ability, considering there's a bunch of different qualifiers that you need to have active in order to utilize it. However, once again, the Grey Knights are definitely a melee focused army, so it's definitely a nice enough ability to have. And finally, the Warlord trait for this Brotherhood is the Oath of Witnesses. The Oath of Witnesses is an aura ability that gives +1 leadership to the bearer of this Warlord trait, and in addition to that, friendly core units within 6 inches automatically pass their morale checks. Not the worst ability to have, but not the most important one either, and there are definitely better options than this within the Codex. As such, I definitely think this is an interesting enough Brotherhood that has a rather decent stratagem and potentially a rather powerful Psychic Power. However, the problem is that it does require a lot of setup to use both the stratagem and the Psychic Power within the course of the game, which does make it a little more limited than some of the other Brotherhoods that are a little more versatile in how they behave. In either case, this is a Brotherhood you can consider, but it's not the best one either. And finally, the last Brotherhood, out of the ones that do see some niche play, but isn't particularly super popular, is known as the Blades of Victory. This is once again a melee-focused Brotherhood, and I think it's one that's very interesting. The stratagem for this Brotherhood is known as Radiant Strike, and for 1 command point, it allows you to select a friendly Brotherhood core infantry unit, and when that unit successfully completes a charge, you count the number of models within engagement range of enemy models, and you roll a d6 for each model within engagement range of an enemy model, and for each roll that exceeds the enemy's toughness, the enemy suffers a mortal wound. This isn't necessarily going to generate a ton of mortal wounds, and is better against enemies with lower toughness, which you are going to be already pretty good against, considering that the Grey Knights definitely have a lot of ability to be rather efficient in melee combat as it is. So this stratagem definitely falls into a little bit of an interesting situation, where it's a little bit of a win more stratagem, but it's definitely an interesting one, and one that can definitely be useless against certain armies, such as Imperial Knights. Though with that being said, I do think it's interesting enough that I kind of like it and I would like to play around with it, even if it's not the best or most efficient stratagem. As for the psychic power is Inescapable Pursuit, and the psychic power is a blessing psychic power with a warp charge value of 6. This psychic power allows the Psyker's unit to reroll their charge roll when making a charge move. Once again, I always like abilities that allow your melee unit to get within melee combat, as that's pretty much the most important thing for a melee unit to do. As such, I definitely think the psychic power is very powerful and one that you definitely want to consider, and the reason why you would go into this brotherhood, as it can definitely really help out a melee army. However, that being said, you can definitely still fail a charge even if you reroll it that one time. So once again, it's a very powerful ability, but one that's very situational and can in situations be absolutely useless. As for the Warlord trait is Vanguard of Aggression, and this is that after deployment, you can select a friendly Blades of Victory core unit within 9 inches of the bearer of this Warlord trait, and both those units make a 6-inch pregame move. Not the worst ability to have, and it can allow you to position 2 different units very effectively, but then again, it's very limited in terms of what you can do because it is limited to the bearer and 1 unit that is within rather close range of the bearer. In any case, abilities like this can be very powerful, it's just a matter of knowing how to use them. However, that being said, all 3 of these abilities are kind of very situational and have opportunities of doing absolutely nothing in certain situations. As such, I can see why this brotherhood is rather fringe and why it's something you should only go into if you're really comfortable with the knowledge that some of your basic sub-faction abilities might do absolutely nothing. Though when they do something effectively, they can definitely change the course of a game. In any case, I think what separates the top 3 brotherhoods from the middle 3 brotherhoods is that the top 3 have 3 abilities that are effective the majority of the time they're used, even if they're not the most powerful abilities in the world, while the more fringe 3 brotherhoods have abilities that can definitely be powerful, they're a little more situational and have a little bit more of a failure rate. So definitely in this situation, consistency has definitely beaten out the ability to be very powerful but very boom bust. Now for these last 2 brotherhoods, I didn't see any tournament lists that ran these brotherhoods. However, that being said, don't let that stop you from trying them out, as there's always room to innovate and always room to have fun, especially in more casual and narrative games. Anyway, with that being said, the first of the bottom 2 brotherhoods is the Word Makers. The Word Maker stratagem is known as Masters of the Word, and for 1 command point, you use this stratagem within your command phase and select a brotherhood character, and that character can replace one of their psychic powers with a Dominus Discipline psychic power that they don't already know, and that's very situational, but it definitely can be fun in the right situations. In any case, I don't think this is something that you're really going to want to invest command points into, especially with how much of a premium command points are, and the benefit you gain from this is rather marginal. As for the psychic power is known as Projection of Purity. This is a malediction psychic power with a warp charge value of 6. It allows you to select an enemy unit within 12 inches of the psyker casting this power, and if successfully manifested, the selected enemy unit is not affected by aura abilities of units from its own army. This can definitely be a very powerful ability, but it does require you to be very close, and it requires you to have an opponent that is utilizing aura abilities to some effect. However, in some situations, certain armies lean very heavily onto aura abilities, and the psychic power can be very devastating against those armies. However, in other situations, this psychic power might not be very useful at all, and combine that with the rather lackluster stratagem that this brotherhood offers, and you see why this one isn't as popular. Finally, the Warlord trait is known as Lore Master, and it says, when the bearer of this trait passes a psychic test with an unmodified roll of 8+, that psychic power cannot be denied. And that's actually a rather powerful Warlord trait. However, do keep in mind that not every army can deny psychic powers, so once again, this Warlord trait is going to be a little bit useless against certain armies. That being said, in situations where it's useful, it can be very impactful if you have certain psychic powers that you really need to cast without them being denied. However, this only affects one specific unit, so you do also have to keep in mind the very narrow use of the specific trait. In any case, the Word Makers have some interesting abilities and can definitely do some interesting tricks, but they definitely do have a very situational nature, and none of their abilities really make that explosive impact against the majority of the armies that you'll be facing on the tabletop. and that's mostly probably what keeps them out of seeing much use, but I can definitely see some fun of playing these in a more narrative game where you know who your opponent's going to be and that you can make use of some of these abilities a lot more effectively than you would when not knowing who your opponent is going to be or what army they're going to be playing. And finally we come to the last brotherhood, known as the Silver Blades. The Silver Blades have a stratagem known as Adeptus Excoriation, and the stratagem will cost you 1 command point, and it allows the selected unit to fall back and shoot within the same turn in which it fell back. Now that's not a bad stratagem to have, and it can definitely be very useful in the right situations. However, that being said, Grey Knight tend to lean towards melee types of armies, even though they can build into shooting armies as well, so this definitely has a limited application, and you have to ask yourself, are you really willing to sacrifice other Brotherhood options in exchange for this specific stratagem? Now as for the psychic power, the psychic power is known as Temporal Accuracy, which is a blessing psychic power with a warp charge value of 5. This psychic power, when successfully manifested, says that Stormbolters, Mastercrafted Stormbolters, and relic versions of those 2 different weapons within the Psyker's unit that manifested this psychic power are treated with weapons with the following profile. They're considered to be Pistol 4 and have a range of 12 inches. This is an interesting ability, as the Grey Knights can definitely have a lot of different Stormbolters within their different forces, and this can allow them to shoot those weapons within close combat as they would be considered pistol weapons. However, that being said, the Grey Knights already are very good within melee combat, as it is in most situations, and as such, this does end up being a bit of a redundant psychic power that's not necessarily going to be as good as you want it to be in most situations. It definitely is a very interesting and unique psychic power, but it definitely isn't one that's going to change the outcome of a game in most situations. And finally, the Warlord trait of this Brotherhood is the Martial Perfection. This Warlord trait says that the bearer can fight first in the combat phase if he's within engagement range when the combat phase begins. In addition to that, the bearer can reroll the hit roll of his melee attacks within the combat phase. This can definitely be an interesting Warlord trait on a melee-focused character, and I do think it's one that's a very nice Warlord trait. However, the other abilities within this Brotherhood definitely keep it down and make it one that you're probably not going to see very commonly. In any case, it's still not the worst sub-faction in the world, however, it just doesn't really give you enough to really justify you going into it, and it's going to be one that you're going to find probably lackluster in most situations. In any case, which of these Brotherhoods do you think is the most interesting, and do you think any of these Brotherhoods are being overlooked in comparison to other ones? Let me know in the comments down below, and do remember, if you're looking to buy models or different card games within the United States, do check out VentureTradeco.com or simply visit the link in the description down below. In any case, as always, thank you for watching and have a great day. See you next time. Bye.